The Millennium, a prophetic forecast by Johanna Brandt. Chapter 9, the fifth period, Faith, the Reformation. The martyrs with their offers of blood, the establishment of the Christian Church as state church, with all its worldly prosperity, Monasticism, with its high spiritual attainments, the Crusades, with their fanatic zeal and overwhelming violence. None of these were able to accomplish the sorely needed Reformation, and yet they have all contributed their share to the great awakening of pure Christian faith, the remembrance of which is specially revived in our hearts at the present time. October 1917, in the celebration of the 400th anniversary of that great event, known to us as the Reformation. 31st October 1517. But let us briefly examine the changes resulting from the Crusades in the Christian Church. We find that the wealth and power of the Church under Constantine the Great and his successors pales in comparison with the riches which were poured into the church treasures at this time. The mightiest nobles and the wealthiest knights who joined the Crusades sold or mortgaged their estates, and princes, knowing how little chance there was of their return, bequeathed their entire possessions to the church. The sacrifices made by individuals in providing themselves with the means of making the Crusades caused immeasurable riches to flow into the church treasures. Not content with this, the papal powers extended the system of the sale of indulgences, the remission of sins by the Pope on payment of sums of money, to a hitherto unheard of extent. At first, every man who assumed the cross, each individual who joined the ranks of the Crusaders, was absolved from sin. Later, a partial remission of sins was granted on the payment of a contribution of money towards an expedition. This was introduced by Pope Celestine III, but at a still later period, Pope Innocent III granted complete remission to one who sent a substitute to the Crusades. This inequity grew until eventually a man could be entirely absolved from the penalties of sin and could be absolved from his Crusader's vow on the payment of a sum of money. The result of this pernicious system was an appalling increase in license and immorality, for there was nothing to restrain and bridle human passions. And it increased, steadily increased, the riches of the Church. The Pope, as conqueror and protector of the Holy Land, for the Crusades, were organized by the Church having called to arms and supplied all the necessary means to carry on the holy wars, became a mighty power with which the state was forced to reckon, an autocrat who could impose and enforce his will where the temporal powers failed. The emperor was the subject of the Pope, no longer the Pope a subject of the emperor, and archbishops, bishops, priests, and prelates became the real rulers of the land. Papal power and influence, extending beyond all bounds in the church and state, led to an oppression of the rights and privileges of the people, which in time broke out in that monstrous form of persecution known as the Inquisition. Then came the first triumph of the Mohammedan armies, in which a great political danger to the Pope was involved, and which necessitated the renewal of the Crusades. Spiritual enthusiasm was on the wane. The spiritual motive had been lost sight of in the unprecedented sufferings and sacrifices which marked the first Crusades, so the Church resorted to other means to stir up the multitudes. Processions, prayers, public exhortations, and even deception and artifice were employed. The flickering embers of religious enthusiasm had to be fanned into an unnatural blaze to promote the papal interests. In time, the state, realizing its own impotence, joined hands with the church, and then the condition of the people became deplorable in the extreme. There was now no court of justice in which grievances could be redressed. The religious intolerance, which had driven the church to resort to violent methods in promoting Christianity, by forcing it upon the world by sheer strength of arms, fostered an attitude of suspicious intolerance towards those Christian believers who evinced the slightest tendency to swerve from the narrow road of orthodox beliefs. This took some time to develop, but in the meantime, it was slowly but surely laying the foundation for the Inquisition. And the Inquisition, as we know, drove the tortured people into revolution. Friction with the Mohammedan faith gave rise to a new form of idolatry, in which the Christians worshipped sacred relics instead of the living God, called upon saints and martyrs to intercede for them at the throne of the Almighty, and raised the Virgin Mary to an unduly exalted state. The importance which was attached to the Rosary at that time, and during many subsequent centuries, traced its origins to a similar feature of Mohammedan worship, known as the Tasbih. In fact, ignorance and superstition exposed the Christians to the grossest deceptions, the most unheard of extortions in the rising traffic in so-called sacred relics. If we had the time, it would be interesting to investigate the stories of the fabulous sums of money spent on the bones of martyrs, fragments of garments stained with martyrs' blood, splinters and nails from the only true cross, and authentic writings and letters from saints and apostles. The body of legend increased enormously, and the searching out of historic sites, the hunting up of sacred localities, plunged the geography of Palestine into a confusion which to the present day racks the mind of the honest investigator. All these complications might have been avoided if Peter of Amiens had not inspired that first crusade by the story of his divine revelations, or if, after he had started it, it had failed in its object, before the Holy Lance was discovered in the church at Antioch, or before the Crusaders became aware of the celestial rider on the Mount of Olives. For it is almost certain that there would have been no second crusade if that first powerfully organized army had failed. The sacrifice of so much blood, right in the beginning of the Crusades, without any result, would undoubtedly have made an end to the unnatural ambition to overcome and possess the Holy Land. However, we have to do with things as they are, not as they might have been. And we may be quite sure that there were people in the Christian church who from the very first strenuously opposed these idolatrous tendencies, and who valiantly fought, too often, alas, at the cost of their precious lives, against the inflowing tide of superstition and spiritual vice. Here we find those countless sects of protesters arising, who, with their lives, sealed with their blood, built the foundation of the present Protestant Church. And it is impossible, in treating this subject, to avoid anticipating the events to be described in the next chapter. For the scarlet thread of martyrdom marked their course right through the Middle Ages, and links it up with the bloody revolutionary events by which the whole of Europe was shaken at the end of the 18th century, the forerunners of the Reformation. I wonder if they have ever taken their rightful place in Christian history. Because they failed, because they paid for their endeavors with their lives, and were not spared to reap the fruits of what they had sown. They have to be put into the background for others who have climbed to the top over the bodies of the forgotten heroes. Their name is Legion, John Hus, Savonarola, Hieronymus, Peter Waldus, Nicholas Bale, and so many others whose careers we fain would follow in this book. They all paid the penalty for protesting against the iniquities of the Roman Catholic Church, with a fortitude and resignation which inspire us with awe. And it was nothing short of miraculous the way some of them were brought upon the path which led to their destruction and to the salvation of the Church. Take the case of Nicholas of Bale alone. He was a rich youth and on the point of marriage with a lady of rank, when, the day before his wedding, he had a vision, a strange and altogether unexpected vision, in which he was asked to give up his bride and to retire from the world in the service of God. He obeyed instantly. Indeed, there is no case on record in which the mystic has failed to respond to the summons when it came. He retired into obscurity and formed a secret bond with only 4 others, to begin with, the friends of God. On the text in John 15 verse 15, "Henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth. But I have called you friends, for all tidings that I have heard of my Father I have made known to you." The veil of mystery hangs over the personal life of the founder of this organization, for he preserved the spirit and the letter of his divine instructions to the end of his days, and became known to us the great friend of the Oberland, the secret friend and counselor of many famous men, the unknown correspondent of leaders and rulers, through whose influence he worked directly on the people. Inconceivably great was the Reformation brought about by this mysterious man. He seemed to live in an atmosphere of his own, in which from time to time the voice of God revealed to him the next step he should take. Through his writings, he reached the whole of France, Germany, Austria, Italy, and Hungary. They were the spiritual leavening of the 14th century, and every effort to trace the mysterious author failed, until in 1395, at a great age, he was hunted down by the inquisitors and burnt at the stake in Vienna. Ruhlmann Merschwin, John Toller, and Henry Suso were among the great mystics who continued his work of Reformation, followed by many others, until in the 16th century the great Martin Luther arose by sheer strength of personality and the weight of an altogether unique moral courage, split the mighty Roman Catholic Church into the 2 great sections which we have to the present time. A. The Roman Catholic section, which, in spite of many serious digressions, rightly claims to be the original Church of Christ, and B. The Protestant section, which under the great reformer Martin Luther rose in revolt against the above-named digressions and broke away from the Mother Church. The story of the Reformation is a history in itself. It cannot be treated adequately in a few pages, and we can make no attempt here to describe its development, its consummation and significance. But its central point of interest, the fact that it acclaimed and vindicated the principle of liberty of conscience in religious matters, cannot be urged with sufficient emphasis. This principle has been scrupulously upheld by the Protestant Church. The violent methods employed by the Roman Catholic Church can never be ascribed to it, and there have been no religious wars carried on by its adherents. In this, the Protestant Church may be regarded as the great forerunner of the era of peace. The principles of religious liberty and tolerance have been maintained, and it is the only Christian church since the time of the early Christian martyrs which has up to the present not been stained by blood. The present political warfare is carried on by Christian nations, both Roman Catholic and Protestant, but the churches have not been involved, and there are at present no indications that the religious wars of the past will be renewed.